Should I sit there? Oh, okay. Yeah, great. Netta, thank you so much, and Saeed, thank you for inviting. I must say, I'm about to introduce a number of people here. This will be the biggest panel I've run in the last year or so, and one of the most distinguished. So you guys did a great job. Can I invite up Barb Keller? And I'll introduce you guys once you're on stage. Stacy Feld, Tamara St. Clair, Alex Romero, Dr. Chris Yeager, and Dr. Sonia Sama. So let me tell you a bit about the panel here, what we're going to do today. Please, yeah. The panel's going to run for, I think, about 45 or 50 minutes, and then we're going to actually be kind of I wouldn't call it a shark tank, more like a dolphin tank for a company called Vuex that we've got Dr. Eleanor Harriman presenting to us at the end for a 5-minute pitch, and we'll all ask some questions. So let me introduce our panelists today. I'll start with Barb. Barb is a technology licensing manager at Mayo Clinic, and Barb is right here. She has prior experience as a contract manager there, as well as being a former patent analyst at IBM. Her primary areas of expertise historically and at Mayo are in healthcare IT and medical devices. She has a BS from Winona State and an MA in management from St. Mary's. Next is Stacy Feld, who is here from Johnson & Johnson, next to Barb. She leads efforts to establish a high-value innovation portfolio for the J&J consumer business, which we all are, I'm sure every one of us in the room has purchased and consumed a J&J product like Tylenol, right? Stacy also serves as an advisor to the Springboard Enterprises Life Sciences Council and the UCSF Clinical and Translational Research Institute. So welcome to Stacy. Tamara is 2 down, actually, so I'm going out of order. She's here as the Chief Innovation Officer from Xerox Healthcare. She leads the innovation portfolio for Xerox and works in both partnerships with high-growth companies and also potentially investing in them. She has a PhD in chemistry from the University of California at Davis and an MBA from Berkeley. And then Alex at the end, and I'll come back. Alex is Romero from leads digital health innovation at GSK. As the lead for that, he collaborates within R&D and the commercial teams to find digital health companies that are synergistic with the GSK consumer business. And he'll go into that in a little more detail later. And then we have actually 2 CMOs here, we have 2 physicians, one CMO and one director of innovation from healthcare providers. So in just a second, we're going to start with the grilling of them first. But next to me is Dr. Chris Yeager, CMIO at Sutter, which is a 23 or so hospital system doing really well in the Bay Area and elsewhere. He is responsible for identifying, assessing, and implementing new technology solutions in that provider organization. He was recognized as one of the 25 CMIOs to know in Becker's Hospital Review. He got his MD from Johns Hopkins and was previously a hospitalist at Sutter. And we also have Dr. Sonia Sama in the middle here. She is the Director of Innovation and New Market Transformation at DaVita, which is one of the largest dialysis as well as providers, as well as I think an ACO now. And she is responsible for sourcing, operationalizing, and investing in disruptive innovation. So I think we have at least 4 or 5 investors here and a couple of doctors too. So she got her MD from UCSF and MBA from Stanford. So let's kick off the panel with our 2. I kind of want to start this. There's going to be a method of my madness. Let's start with the customers to some extent here. And so I want to start with Chris and Sonia, who both are members of provider organizations. And I want to start with the question around the theme around what keeps you guys and your leadership up at night, with an eye toward those things that you think technology could play a role in solving. So as I open it up to you, feel free to spend a couple more sentences explaining, specifically what you do in your organizations. But that's my first question. What keeps you up at night? So, why don't you start, Sonia?
Great. So DaVita Healthcare Partners is a $19 billion organization that's got a couple different arms. So you mentioned the kidney care dialysis arm, and then we recently acquired Healthcare Partners, which is a large provider organization that has 1,000 providers that we employ, 14,000 that we affiliate with. And then specifically around the ACO comment, we've got almost 1 million lives under global capitation risk, meaning the insurance company kind of gives us a pool of money, and then we as a provider organization decide how that pool of money should get spent, with the goal being that we spend that money so that we can reduce overall medical spend and keep our patients healthy. So the three things that we would say we think about or keep us up at night. Number one, we want to be a clinically differentiated company. Number two, we want to be differentiated in provider experience. And number three, we want to be differentiated in patient experience. So the first one around clinical outcomes, some of the things that we're looking at, we've got a huge data set, claims data, EMR data that we use to actually look for gaps in care, things that our patients haven't done yet in terms of preventative care measures that we want to do to keep our patients healthy. And then second, we're rethinking where we provide care. So rather than providing care in the physician's office, many of the patients that we care for under global capitation are elderly and very sick. So you can imagine things like home care, providing digital solutions to transmit information from the home, along with in-home caregivers, or areas that we're looking at for clinical outcomes. For the second, for a differentiated provider experience, we have a lot of primary care docs, and their days are really busy and not that fun, and we want to kind of rehumanize medicine again. So we're looking at a lot of technologies that can be both point of care solutions for our docs, but also to help them be more productive and happier and not see the downsides of what it's like to be a PCP these days, but rather the upsides. And then lastly, on differentiated patient experience, so we're starting to rethink how we can connect with patients as well. So we've got a huge focus now on mobile technology and mobile applications. So again, when patients experience us, how can we connect with them outside of just calling the PCP's office and coming to visit us? But how can we connect via a mobile app or a tablet or something in their home? And then how can we make that personal and fun for them as well? So those are the three main things that we think about.
I'm going to come back to a couple of those. Before I do, maybe Chris, you can tell us about your role at Sutter. Sure. And then what keeps you up at night.
Sure. Sutter, as Robert said, we have about 24, 25 hospitals in Northern California, depending on how you count them. 5,000 physicians aligned with us. 2,000 are foundation physicians. We can't employ them. 2,000 physicians are in our foundations. We can't employ them, but they're in aligned medical groups. Another 3,000 physicians in aligned IPAs. Many of the same things keep us up at night as with you. Certainly, we've been successful in a fee-for-service world, and there's large inertia, a momentum problem there, which keeps us from jumping into the value-based care world. We worry about our traditional competitors and non-traditional competitors like DaVita, who pick up physicians and then directly compete with us. We worry about the provider experience as well, in particular primary care. There's a growing shortage of primary care physicians with increased burnout, and their experience of providing care has certainly shifted over the last decades. And in addition, adding primary care physicians is expensive. It costs us just under $1 million a year to add a new primary care physician to stand them up in practice and build them. So looking for ways that we can grow up primary care physicians' practice and panel size without burning them out more is a key consideration for us. Patient experience, certainly both the sick patients as well as that growing kind of consumer end, patients not so sick, but that need to engage with our health system, making it more convenient for them, giving them a better experience.
So I'm going to make this a little spicier here. So we have two doctors here, and then myself. I was watching a presentation from the Chief Research Officer of the Advisory Board. Let's just go to the patient experience for a second. He did a survey of primary care docs, and then he did a survey of consumers, and he asked, what are the most important factors that you think about when you think about choosing a primary care doctor and whether you're satisfied? And of course, all the doctors think that our relationship with our patients and how much they think about us and the trusted physician-patient relationship was the most important thing. But it turned out that actually, by far margin, the most important thing to patients, according to the advisory board, was convenience and access. Mm-hmm. So with that being, I guess the question I want to throw out is to Sutter and to Davida, is how do technologies like telemedicine and connected devices and mobility, so patient apps for management of disease, telemedicine, access, how are these things changing the way you deliver healthcare? Maybe start with you, Chris.
Sure,
yeah.
sure. I think it's terrifying primary care physicians. The growing market for consumer wearables and that amount of data, patients would love for their providers to actually look at that data. But that's more noise to the providers. They're already having a problem keeping afloat in the ocean of data that's coming to them in the EMRs and through other sources. So I think we need to find ways where we can bring that data to the providers, leverage the value from it, but make it valuable for the patient. So an example would be diabetes. Traditional model for managing that is patient measures their blood sugars 3 times a day, 4 times a day, tracks it in a little log on paper, brings it to the doc's office, and you'd love for the doctor to look through that and make sense of it, and they pretend like they do, you know this.
It's written in the parking lot right before they come in.
Exactly, exactly. But what would make more sense is to actually have that data nicely graphed for the patient or for the provider, and even having correlation between some symptoms they had, what medicines they're taking, and so that you can actually have a visual display that the patient interacts with the provider on, that you can then actually do something with all that data. But if it's just being pumped into the EMR through connectivity, it's not going to be looked at, and it's also a medical liability for the provider, because if there is signal in there, if there's a really bad hypoglycemic episode, or if it's a hypertensive and there's really high blood pressures and you miss it, you're not monitoring it, it's a potential medical liability.
Got it. Okay. What about you, Sonia? And I'm going to tee up Barb. Think about this, because I'm going to ask you, I think you should comment on this. After you answer, I want to go back to another question, so don't answer this yet, but how do we pay for this stuff? But maybe take the question of how's primary care changing with connected devices and telemedicine, et cetera?
Yeah, so there's 2 sides to that. One is provider access. So if you don't have access with your providers, then it's your patients can't see them. And then the other end is patient engagement. So the type of information that a patient sends back to us. On the first side of that, I know Christopher and I are both looking at startups that actually increase provider access. So takes off of their plate stuff like documentation, time in the EMR, so they have more time for patients. So we've got to increase access first.
What's an example of one of those? Is that a company like Augmetics? Or?
Yeah,
okay.
A company like Augmetics, for example.
So basically automating some of physician or nursing workflow to give them more time to spend with a patient?
Because you've got a huge access issue on the PCP side. So patients aren't going to be happy until you fix that first. And then on the patient engagement side, we employ a number of care managers and staff that are kind of an intermediary between the patient and the provider, who can do much of the care coordination that's needed in a global capitation world. And so we're currently piloting a mobile phone app that actually sends information based on how a patient's engaging with their care plan back to a care manager rather than the physician. And the care manager is responsible for then assessing, based on the interaction with the care plan, is this patient high risk and do I need to reach out to them in real time or not? So that's how we think about both of those.
So let's start with Barb on this, and if you don't feel comfortable, Barb, I'll go back to them. But I want to move into, those sound like great technologies. Getting doctors more time away from screens to patients, whether that's with transcription or Siri-like technologies. That's kind of interesting. But how do you figure out what bucket of payment does it go into? Let's take those two examples, a mobile app for getting information to a care manager and something to help automate physician or nursing workflow. How do you decide as a provider organization to pay for one of these things? Do you look for a CPT code? Do you think about the operational cost reduction you get? How do you think about what it's worth and what you pay?
For provider access, it's easy. So if your providers are more productive, they can see additional patients. And we live in both the global capitation and fee-for-service world. So from a fee-for-service perspective, your providers are more productive. They're your most expensive cost in the system. You can make money if they see more patients. From a global capitation world, if your high-risk patients are calling the PCP and can't get in, then they're going to go to the ER and get hospitalized potentially. So you can see reduced utilization by increasing provider access. On the other end, if you can get more information real time from the patients in their home, then you can help predict when those patients are going to have an adverse event like a hospitalization. So much of the spend in a global cap world is inpatient spend, and what you can do to reduce that is kind of the holy grail. So the piece from the patient engagement mobile app side is paid for by reducing admissions and lowering inpatient medical utilization.
Okay. So Barb, maybe you could tell us a little bit about what you do at Mayo as an intro, and then comment on how you think about triaging who to work with, as we were talking about last night. I don't want to get into pilots yet because it's the next theme, but how you think about whether something is worth paying for as an ultimate customer at Mayo.
Yep. So I work as a technology licensing manager within Mayo Clinic Ventures, which is the tech transfer office of Mayo Clinic. So we look at all of the intellectual property that's developed by our Mayo Clinic employees across Jacksonville, Arizona, as well as in Rochester and our health systems. So we're primarily responsible for licensing out technology, but another part of our group is to create startup companies and to work with startup companies. So one of the things when we look at technologies that are disclosed to our office from our employees, we look at what is it reimbursable? Is it something that if we were to take this out to a company, is it something that can be reimbursed? We think that is one of the challenges when you're looking to take technologies out. As consumers, they expect healthcare organizations to provide, right, that access to them for free. And so when you're taking a new technology to a healthcare organization, the first question from leadership is, what's kind of my return on investment, right? And so having that reimbursability is really important. We also look at it from protection. Obviously, not everything is patentable, but that doesn't preclude us from moving forward with commercialization. It's helpful, but it really depends on, is there a need out in the marketplace? And so one example, I think, on the patient monitoring and getting access to our patients is with a company that we worked with called Preventus, in which we licensed a remote monitoring device to them and worked very closely with our cardiac physicians, and was a device that needed FDA approval, right? So then you could bill for it. So that's kind of what we do within our office.
Great. So let's transition to you and Stacy for a quick conversation here. You mentioned a couple of things I want to talk about. So since we're at the connected, we're at Plug and Play talking about connected health, a lot of the companies that are here listening to us are earlier, and a lot of them are going to be working probably with universities or provider organizations, either as partners in development or even potentially out licensing technology from a place like Mayo or Stanford. Two questions, but let's start with the first one, which is, give us your thoughts, Stacy, since you also work with UCSF and these innovative companies, on how you think early stage companies can and should partner in developing their products and services with provider organizations like a UCSF or a Stanford or a Sutter. And if you have any examples of companies in the J&J consumer health kind of ecosystem where you've seen that work well.
Yeah, so I mean, it's interesting because we come at it from the J&J perspective, although in a very different context, quite similarly as to, what we've been hearing from Chris and Sonia, looking at, adopting new technologies for different applications. And so if I were advising a startup or an entrepreneur about how to think about partnering early, fundamentally it's really about de-risking. And it's about establishing, customer validation, technology validation, and applications in a real world context, whether we're talking about in a hospital system or, sitting on the shelf of Walgreens, a new technology embodied in a product. So we take a very investor-driven mindset, which is really about establishing what are the proof points, what are the points of de-risking new technology, and structuring a pilot or a proof of concept around that.
Got it. Okay. And Barb, you had mentioned that you out-licensed technology from Mayo. Preventice was a good example. So how do you guys mechanically, let's say I wanted to start a company and I saw something at Mayo, some engineer showed me something. What's the mechanics for, just give us a blueprint of how that whole thing works, how that story works, and will you own 95% of the company that I start at the end, or are you guys going to be reasonable and I can pay you $100 for an exclusive irrevocable license? So help us understand how that works, how technology in digital health, like Preventice, gets out of the Mayo Clinic into a company that investors will fund.
Yeah, so there's a couple of different ways. So we get approached by startup companies who have a technology and are looking to build it out, and they're looking to build it out in a healthcare field, but they don't have the healthcare expertise. And so, world-renowned Mayo Clinic, they come to us and they ask if we have champions or physicians and staff that are looking to kind of be innovative, take their product, test it, but also provide clinical expertise and knowledge, which in our mind is intellectual property. So a fair amount of, at least on the health IT side, and what I'm involved in is working with those startup companies to tap into that knowledge and expertise of our physicians. And so when we're doing that, we give them a certain amount of time that our physicians can work with them to help develop their product. We may be making improvements to their product, we may not be. But another piece of that is then testing their product. It's one thing to come in through Mayo Clinic as a vendor vendee. It's a really different relationship versus if you come in kind of where Mayo Clinic is providing some expertise and knowledge to help build that product and is beta testing or piloting that product while it's being built out. It's a little bit easier to then bring it in to then the vendor-vendee side, right? So in one point you're coming in to beta test it, and at the end of that beta testing, Mayo Clinic may say, we want to bring that product in, we've already been doing the research on it, and then it switches over to a vendor-vendee relationship. It's a little bit more, it's a smoother process, I would say.
So how do you, and also for you, Stacy, how do you guys think about the deal structure? Is it, just to like make this a little more atomic, do companies usually, are they expected to give away equity and royalties and an upfront payment that they have to go find if they're a seed company? Or is it okay to, what's the duration of a process to get, maybe not just a patent, but copyrighted software out of a university to start a company or add to a product in a company?
Yeah, so for Mayo Clinic, when a startup company comes to us and they're looking to tap into kind of that clinical expertise and knowledge, it's a pretty simple mathematical equation. It's how much time you want of that physician or staff, how many hours, in a month times a year, and there's a standard rate at Mayo Clinic, and we're gonna want that value exchanged in equity. So that's simple and pretty straightforward. But at the same time, we also want a downstream royalty. Equity is a risk to us, and so we're gonna want some at least potential cash from a royalty stream perspective. And we look at that in a couple of different ways. If we're just bringing knowledge and expertise, it's one royalty. If we're bringing knowledge and expertise and we're also then down the road we become a named inventor on a patent, then we want a different royalty structure, and it's all negotiated up front.
Got it. Okay. Anything to add there, Stacey?
The way we come at it from a deal perspective is really to anchor in initially around what we're trying to accomplish in a pilot, and as I said before, what the milestones and the objectives are. And then we wrap the right business structure around that, recognizing that it's not one size fits all. One tool, if you will, that we do use quite often is an option structure, where we have a proof of concept or some research collaboration tied to specific milestones that typically we would fund. And we're not usually talking about millions of dollars, but more in the hundreds of thousands of dollar range, again, to really focus on de-risking what the near-term kind of critical path milestones are. And then at the conclusion of that research collaboration, we would have an evaluation period that would likely trigger some commercial relationship or path to a commercial relationship, whether that's a license to the technology in a particular field, a co-development relationship, or some sort of downstream relationship where we're engaging in an effort to commercialize. And there might be equity tied to that, there might be milestones and royalty payments.
That's great. I'm going to change the order of one thing here because I want to bring Tamara in with Alex to a discussion with Stacy. So you guys all think about the world, you're all commercial and potentially strategic partners. So let's start with that. And then I want to also focus on in that where you guys think the biggest opportunities are. You have two people here that are focused on the consumer space. So I want to focus on that. And then I think, Tamara, you're focused a little bit more probably on the B2B or, yeah. So why don't you guys talk about where you see the biggest opportunities in those spaces and how you think about a corporate partner, how you think about being a corporate partner to a small company. So let's start with you, Tamara.
Great. So a lot of people don't even realize that Xerox is a healthcare company. So maybe I'll start there. So we're a $3 billion healthcare company, and mostly in health IT. And we actually have a really large footprint. We're in payers, providers, pharma, and government healthcare. And in those areas, we do care and case management in Midas, which I think Sutter has. We also have a reimbursement hub, and we do transaction processing. So we spent quite a bit of time, usually at the beginning of the year, thinking a little bit about the commercial healthcare strategy, and we've outlined our innovation roadmaps. And along those innovation roadmaps, we figure out what the build, buy, and partner and acquire looks like along those. What should we invest in internally, and what should we look outside of our four walls? And right now we're looking at anywhere care, so where telehealth and other opportunities actually will change the paradigm of care delivery. Another is healthcare marketplace, understanding that what's going on in retail will likely start to, and is surfacing in healthcare. So how we actually transact, how we buy healthcare, how we interact with our physicians. And then the last is the overused word of population health management, but it's really trying to understand how an end-to-end solution with looking at key aspects of patient registry and attribution at one end and real outcomes at the other end with all the services, segmentation, stratification, and interventions in between. So right now, those are the three areas of focus for us.
Great. And how do you think about, just give me a minute on, how do you think about partnering with a small company? Because as Xerox, you could crush a small company with the weight of the requirements that they would have to satisfy as a new customer.
So
how does that work?
I think we're kindred spirits, because what Stacy says is very much the way Xerox thinks. Usually it's a very strategic relationship. As I mentioned, it needs to be in kind of those innovation trajectories. We are very sensitive that we don't want to mess up the secret sauce. We think about milestones, whether they're development milestones, commercial milestones. We also realize that one size doesn't fit all, so the agreement needs to satisfy our risk profile, and moving through that risk profile, funding can come in as pure funding, convertible equity. We never want to roll it up to our P&L, so we want to make sure that we stay far enough away from that equity position. And then, our lawyers, accountants, finance folks help us with mitigating financial liability, security liability, all that kind of liability is probably something that is kind of the weightiest part of the internal negotiations, and then it's kind of the weightiest part of that contract.
Great. So Alex, let's jump to you. What do you focus on at GSK? Where are the big opportunities, and how do you partner with small companies?
So GSK, I'm like Stacy, we're focused on the consumer side of the business, and so we actually just emerged from a joint venture earlier this year with Novartis. So really, it's a new company, and we're really just sort of emerging from this and sort of trying to figure out what to do in the space. But really, my role is really is focused on sort of how do we find partners, technologies that sort of align with sort of the major categories that we're playing in. We're as a consumer company, we're very interested in things like pain management, smokers' health, respiratory health, so allergy, things like that, and how could we find technologies that will help our consumers manage those conditions on their own. So being an over-the-counter company, we're concerned with allowing patients to do that safely and being able to improve their outcome. And there's plenty of challenges that our consumers face in terms of both the knowledge of sort of the condition that they're trying to treat, perhaps even diagnosis in some cases, and then also just getting better outcomes, whether that means medication adherence and how can we help them do that better. Right. And I think there's a lot of room for improvement there. And then basically in terms of looking for for partners, I mean, we're just looking for things that really align with our major areas that we're interested in, and that could mean anywhere from helping commercial development to earlier stage validation of the technology, make sure that again it's we can produce data that will satisfy FDA or what have you.
So let's talk between you and Stacy about consumer health. So you guys come from companies that sell chemicals in the consumer market in well-established markets for the treatment of diseases that are sold over the counter. Where do you see, first question is, are consumers paying for digital health technologies yet, in your opinion? And which ones do you think are the most promising that a consumer would pay for? Sorry, I went off script here a little bit.
So I'll actually, I'll cite one of your partners who I think set up an interesting framework for thinking about what consumers will pay for. Are we going to pay for an app that tells us what we should eat and how we should exercise? Probably not. There's a lot of those available. Are we going to pay for an app that provides us with nutritional information about diet and from physical therapists, nutritionists, dietitians? Maybe. Would you pay for an app if it provided you with an opportunity to have better outcomes with a particular condition, whether it's a disease or a health condition? Probably. So I think it really goes back to what's going to offer a consumer something that's meaningful to them that differentiates from a lot of the I don't want to say noise, but a lot of the offerings that are out there. And I think that really comes back to what J&J Consumer is looking at, which is how can new technologies, new channels, new business models offer new differentiated solutions to consumer. I think digital is one example of that. One of the reasons why we're excited to be partnering with Plug and Play on the connected health side is because we think devices, for example, and connected devices offer a new solution for consumers and people to manage their health. And I think the challenge to maybe create a little thread through all of this is today, the consumer health ecosystem, whether we're talking about home health or retail health, the self-care model is really in parallel with the healthcare system. And Chris gave us some good reasons why they shouldn't completely be connected because there's a deluge of information. But if we can figure out what the meaningful data points are to create bridges in those, across those systems, I think we create value for all of the, triangulation of providers, payers, and we don't say patients, we say people.
No. Let me, before I go to you, Alex, so just to, that's really helpful, but if I think about consumers, I guess one thing in healthcare that, and I'm a beneficiary as an emergency physician of this trend, is that, there are vitamins and then there's Tylenol. So there is pain and there's prevention. And I guess, in the ER, I deal with people who have a symptom today that they're worried about. Primary care doctors have a much harder job because they have to convince people to take vitamins or prevent Flonase, for example, is not really associated with rapid improvement of symptoms. I mean, maybe there's a claim there. I don't know what the monograph says, but Tylenol is. Tylenol is, you have a fever, you have pain, take Tylenol. How do you guys think about, telemedicine is in urgent care right now for the most part. I want to talk to a doctor now. I have an itch, scratch it. How do you think about consumer companies in digital health and what they're focused on with respect to the itch and pain or prevention and vitamins, as Nirayal would say? I'm hooked.
I mean, I think there's a lot of really interesting things happening in telemedicine. I think there are, in consumer, it's a little bit different from, I guess, some of the more chronic conditions. But I think there are examples where consumers don't really understand what their problem is and could use some professional advice. So I think there is some areas there. I think that it makes sense. Particularly, I think there's areas where we're trying to understand what are some therapeutic areas that are currently now managed by physicians that perhaps consumers might be able to delve into and manage on their own. For example, perhaps maybe asthma could be an example. There's nothing over the counter for asthma now, but perhaps as technologies become more sophisticated, and we can sort of develop, whether they be devices or other technologies that can help them sort of manage it with less interaction, not necessarily excluding the physician from the equation, but less interaction from physicians.
Technology perspective, we have advances in machine learning algorithms and big data analytics that can offer opportunities for consumers to get a better grip on what their symptoms are, and then potentially connect that up to a telehealth platform. So we think about telehealth not just as a new channel for care, but as an opportunity for feedback from consumers on how they're doing once they receive an intervention, whether the intervention is a device, care, or a product. And I guess one example where I see this happening and is connected up to consumer health is in dermatology.
Interesting. Okay.
Can I add something?
Yes, absolutely.
So, we've made a foray into telehealth, and I'm wondering if folks are seeing the same thing. I think we've all read about some of the utilization issues that have been hitting the market with some of our favorite friends out there. And I think, Chris, you made a point about, the physician, or helping the physician through their workflow. And I think one of the things that we've seen is you still have to kind of think about the physician when you're thinking about telehealth. And I think that there's been a lot of interesting stuff out there, but they really haven't cracked the utilization nut. And that's what I think that's been missing in some of those.
Great. So I think this is going to end at 11:45. So I want to make sure, I've got one last topic that we're going to have a roundtable discussion on, but I want to make sure that Vuix is getting teed up to pitch us in maybe 5 or 7 minutes. The last topic I think is really important. It's one that comes up in certainly almost, if not every, digital health, connected health investment we've looked at, and that is pilots. At some point, every company wants to have a business model and generate revenue, and in that transition from idea to revenue or business model, there could be a provider partner that would have to buy something. There could be a consumer that would have to buy something. There could be a business that would have to buy something. And so I want to focus on this idea of pilots. We see it a lot in provider organizations. We also see it in consumer health investments. And I guess all of us can talk about this. So I think I'm gonna jump in with this is what makes a successful pilot, and what do entrepreneurs need to think about when designing pilots with an institution? I'm going to start with the providers because there's a large percentage of providers that are doing pilots. So Chris, let's start with you. How do you guys think about your piloting portfolio and what makes a successful pilot, where to the company, obviously, a successful pilot is that you become a long-term, high-value customer? Mm-hmm.
It's tough in an organization like Sutter. The technology department doesn't love pilots. They're a traditional waterfall approach to implementing technology. So they want to go with a proven vendor, kind of like Barb said. There's a different pathway for a vendor versus a startup and pilot and potential strategic partner. So first off, we stay away from the IT department when we're trying to frame what a pilot might be. Make sure it's tied to a business purpose, business objective, and you define the milestones based on those objectives, not on some traditional IT pathway. We have a R&D function that we try and leverage to work on our pilots, and so we have in that R&D department epidemiologists, scientists, and people with experience in running pilots and creating the milestones, and again tying those to the business objectives. And we structure agreements like both Barb and Stacy were saying as well with those milestones in there. A successful pilot, we hope, will meet those milestones, and then we can scale across the organization. And I think those in our organization who are good with pilots try to remain cognizant of the risk of over-customizing a startup solution for our organization. Which could ruin the startup because they can't sell it elsewhere. We look for other partners outside of our competitive footprint that could potentially partner as well, other provider systems that might be interested, and participate in cohorts for those types of things as well. Great.
So let's go to Barb next, actually. So building on what Chris said. What if I'm an entrepreneur and I want Mayo to ultimately be ultimately pay me a couple $100,000 a year for my software solution that you buy to engage your patients in the management of their, say, diabetes or heart conditions with my connected device. Talk me through how I build a pilot with endpoints that I can then use to get that sale.
So when you talk about kind of building out that study, I'll call it a pilot study, you do want to make sure that the endpoints are clear, and what you're trying to get out of those endpoints is, what's the value? How does the pilot kind of set you apart from others in the market that are already trusted vendors like Chris pointed out? The other thing, to Chris's point, and Mayo Clinic is going through a huge EMR conversion right now with Epic, and so any pilot that is going to tap into our IT group isn't going to go because we can't pull any of those resources out of our IT right now. So we want to be really cognizant as you're building that pilot that you're really doing the work from an IT perspective, and from our perspective, we're either enrolling the patients, right? We're doing what we do best. And so for us, we want to be very clear up front as to what the end goal is. We want milestone driven as well, because sometimes we do bring funding for pilots. We have within our office some venture innovation program funds to help companies structure those pilots. And so we want clear delineations as to what those milestone achievements.
Tamara, how do you guys think about pilots when you work with Xerox works with a company? Do you do those commercially?
Yeah, we actually do, and we have a small group that does them, so it's outside of kind of the big bureaucracy that can hold things back within Xerox. And I think we've learned that you have to have the right partners at the table. So if you've got a target market, make sure that it's represented within that pilot consortium. And we've also learned that people have to have skin in the game. So if you bring together a group of pilots and they haven't paid kind of a membership fee, they're probably not going to show up. They also need to be flexible. A lot of times small companies need to pivot during the target, and that's great information. You need your partners to be able to pivot as well. We've also found that you need to kind of think about the goals of the target to be like your business model goals, your commercial goals, so that you test those out as well, and they have to be aligned amongst the groups that are playing in that pilot. And then I think it's finding the right milestones. So we've made a bunch of mistakes because you're not going to test this out for 24 months and make sure you see the hockey stick. So you need to figure out what is the right proxy. So for example, in telehealth, if it's, we're going to place 200 kiosks, but there's not this utilization target. Being able to make sure that you actually choose kind of the right milestones that are going to prove this out.
Got it. Okay. Does anyone else, one last comment from anyone else before we jump to our company?
The one thing I'd add to that too is if you have a product that's going to need FDA approval, you want to make sure that you're capturing the data that you need to capture to take that
You had to talk about the FDA.
Sorry.
I actually think it's an important point. I just want to make one comment. I mean, we'll probably hear from a lot of companies today that are building devices that ultimately will go through an FDA process to deliver, clinical outcomes data, but are going down a consumer path and thinking about how you can drive a clinical pilot to gather data in support of not only driving consumer adoption, but that longer term FDA regulatory path. And we're seeing a number of companies take that strategy.
Yeah, I think we're getting to a point in digital health where more and more connected device entrepreneurs understand how important reimbursement, how you get paid if it's reimbursement or not, and regulation needs to be thought of on day one. So you want to say one thing before
One more point about the end goal. So we're all saying you have to have end goals in mind, but as a provider who has 800 or 1 million patients under risk, everyone's end goal is we're going to reduce spend, we're going to reduce readmission and hospitalizations. Well, guess what? Every pilot that's coming to me is saying that, and we as a business are focused on that too. So it's hard for me to know that your pilot actually moved the needle. So there's got to be another interim metric that I don't have to wait 12 months to find out if this cohort reduced their readmission rate. So there's got to be a workflow improvement. Maybe you're making my care managers more efficient. Maybe you're making my home visit program more efficient with telehealth or connected devices. And then we can track process metrics in addition to outcome metrics.
That's really valuable. So operational versus just clinical outcomes. So let's jump. Dr. Harriman, we'll give you 5 minutes here to pitch, and then we're going to do the dolphin tank thing.
It could be shark.
Shark?
I'll take shark.
All right.
Yeah. Hello, everyone.
Hi.
I think this is this on? Can you hear me? Yes. Okay. Great. And there we go. So just a couple of seconds about myself. I'm the Chief Medical Informatics Officer for Vuix. I began in electrical engineering, and I'm a pathologist by training at UCSF. Got my MBA from Harvard and have been in various areas of healthcare, but most recently in informatics for the last several years. And all right, so a little bit about Vuix. We are now at 75 employees, founded in 2010, and we currently have 150 customers. We most recently actually signed Mayo, so have some experience there as well. What we do is laboratory analytics and integrate across the lab, which is actually a lot more complex than you'd think, and sell insight solutions. So analytics and informatics solutions to both the laboratory for business intelligence and some clinical intelligence, as well as to health systems, which I'll talk to you about more later. Health systems, clinical insights, readmissions, predictive analytics, population health management. So we have 2 different customer groups. So you can see here, reference labs, hospitals, health systems are among our customers. So why do we focus on lab? Laboratory pathology data is extremely underappreciated and fascinating because of its value. Laboratory data drives about 70% of clinical decision making, and yet it represents about 3% of health spend. It's a highly levered area as a data source. In addition, it has tremendous predictive potency. If you look at people who measure this in terms of actuarial
and other ways, it's actually one of the most potent sources of predictive analytics. And you can do a lot in terms of predicting all sorts of disease states, et cetera, and I'll talk about that in a moment, with lab data plus just a few other data sources. It also is excellent for population health management because laboratory data is ubiquitous, as many of you know. It's structured, it's real time, and it's a natural care coordinator. It goes across providers, goes across care settings, et cetera. And then it's also natural for personalized medicine. As you all know, molecular diagnostics, genomic sequencing, it's at the heart of driving therapies, it's the heart of personalized medicine. And when you add other types of lab data to that, which is part of what we're doing, you can have phenotypic interpretation of genomic sequencing, which is an area we're looking at that can give you a whole new powerful way to interpret gene variants, for instance. So what we have is a cloud SaaS platform where we are integrating, as I said, across the laboratory. The laboratory is not just an LIS, Laboratory Information Systems. It's actually difficult, which is one of the reasons places like Mayo came to us. It's actually difficult to integrate across the laboratory. You've got chemistry, pathology, molecular. These are all in very different data systems. And so in order to unleash the power of the lab data, you have to integrate. And this is what we're good at. And we don't use the IT people. This is the other reason the customers come to us. We are able to do that without that. And then we have a whole nother secret sauce, which is the analytics that we put on top of them. Again, both business intelligence, things like how to grow lab outreach. Mayo has one of the largest reference labs in the country. So that's very important to them, how to create efficiencies, how to do other types of business intelligence and insights. And then, very interestingly, for the health systems, one of our things that we're launching right now is how to predict renal failure among patients with chronic kidney disease. We're launching that right now, as well as readmissions predictions, which we have, et cetera. So I'm 55 seconds, actually. Yes, so let me turn it over to you and you can start asking questions.
Great. Why don't we start? Does anyone want to start, or I've got one? My first question is, tell us about how you've proven your ROI. Whatever your price is, what's the tangible ROI to the pilot question we just had that a hospital system realizes in investing in your platform?
In the hospital systems, the ROI is first of all going to be specific to each predictive analytics, like to a CKD renal failure. It's going to be specific to that. And for readmissions, specific CHF readmissions, the ROI is going to be specific to the problem and solution. Because we are just launching these, it's going to be determined by that pilot and by the literature and doing economic modeling, which we're doing. But we don't have, we are beginning it. We're beginning the pilots for the renal, so we don't have I can't give you an ROI yet because we're just starting that. In the business intelligence ones, again, it's going to be specific to the indication. I can give you, for instance, on the infectious disease, one of our clients found that they saved $2 million in a year using our infectious disease tools by identifying turnaround time outliers, in believe it or not, in plating, and that was driving increased length of stay for sepsis and pneumonia people.
So operationally. And let's take 3 questions, guys, and then we gotta close out. Who would like to ask one?
So I'm curious about your clinical insights. Can you imagine creating a menu that you then offer, or are you working collaboratively to try to understand what your clients are trying to tackle? So the renal failure or readmissions, for example. Because people generally want to kind of refine or define their own algorithms there.
Yeah, that's a good question. We definitely, it's going to probably be both. We're going to have a menu for sure that we continue to add to. We also have something called the VHI, which allows people to create their own reports and dashboards and all. I don't think we foresee having them actually do their own algorithms and develop, on their own, but they can develop their own analytics, and we give them that capability. There are places like Kaiser who are interested in a more collaborative relationship where they really want they want to sort of partner with us to have us be the strategic partner that's the analytics partner, if you will, on the clinical insight side. So. Would this be real time and you'd see alerts in your EMR? Yes, the way it would work is that for the readmissions, for instance, the clinician, we'd use routine admission labs, a subset of routine admissions labs, and then the clinician would see Mrs. Jones has a risk, is at high risk of a readmissions right on admission. They'd start seeing that in their EMR, EHR.
So
Right.
one last, Stacy, we'll finish with you. What's your question?
So my question is about your sales cycle and who you're selling to. So you spoke eloquently about the complexity of, we're not talking about just one lab. It's pulling together a lot of different labs. Are you selling to a lab director? Do you need the infectious disease physicians in? What does this selling process look like?
Yeah, it's multiple people. For the business intelligence insights, it's lab executives. When we get into the renal prediction and all, then we're going more to the C-suite, to the health system C-suite people. So it's a combination.
Well, thank you very much, Eleanor, for presenting, and thank you guys all for maintaining some attention here for our great panelists. I really appreciate everyone on the panel, as well as Plug and Play, for setting this up. Sorry for going over a couple minutes.